Hello and welcome to the Farming Week, the podcast from Agriland keeping you up to date with all the latest in Irish agriculture. I'm Charles O'Donnell and I'm joined by Agriland journalist Aisling O'Brien. Well, for the last week, the word on everyone's lips has been tariff. And as with last week's podcast, that's the topic that we're going to start on today. We speculated that the introduction of tariffs on imports to the US was an issue that could evolve and change quickly, and as he's prone to do, Donald Trump has changed direction. Aisling, what's the latest?
Yeah, so last week when we spoke, Charles, and a week is a very long time in the White House, that's for sure, President Trump had announced this range of tariffs on countries right around the world with these higher rates of what he called reciprocal tariffs on countries that he claimed had the most significant trade imbalances with the US. Now, agri-food produce, of course, from Ireland in particular, our dairy and our drinks exports and our whiskey exports particularly would have been impacted by a 20% tariff on exports from the EU. That was the reciprocal tariff that was placed on the EU. And it was accompanied by a blanket minimum tariff of 10% on every other country. Now, these tariffs would have been in addition to all the standard tariffs that are already in place for exporters to the US, and of course would have had huge implications for a range of companies, not just, of course, in the agri-food sector, but right across the Irish economy and beyond. So then last night, we got the news on Donald Trump's social media platform, Truth Social, as he's prone to do, to take to Truth Social to make such announcements. He announced a 90-day pause on the higher rate of tariffs on imports to the US from the EU and other countries, except for China, though. And the post appeared to indicate that the lower 10% rate will now apply across the board, but the tariffs on China are set to escalate in that ongoing aspect of this wider trade dispute across the world. And the social media post also claimed that he was rowing back on this higher rate of tariffs because more than 75 countries had called representatives of the US, including in the departments of Commerce, the Treasury, and the United States Trade Representative as well, to negotiate a solution to these tariffs and the impact that they would have. And that seems to be his line of thinking. I suppose the stock markets and the bond markets may have had a role to play as well, because we saw turbulent times across the last week when it came to stock markets, and they seem to be reacting positively to this pause now. And somebody else who's reacted positively is Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission. She's welcomed this decision by Donald Trump to pause the US reciprocal tariffs. And she said that clear, predictable conditions are essential for trade and for supply chains to function. And she said that tariffs are taxes that only hurt businesses and consumers. And in a post on X, formerly known as Twitter, of course, just a short time ago before we started recording, Ursula von der Leyen said that the European Commission has taken note of the announcement by President Trump and that we want to give negotiations a chance. And while finalising the adoption of the EU countermeasures that saw strong support from EU member states, we're putting them on hold for 90 days. And if negotiations are not satisfactory, our countermeasures will kick in and preparatory work on further countermeasures continues. And she said, as I've said before, all options remain on the table. So it looks like there has been a pause on both sides of the Atlantic, which I'd say many people will be breathing a sigh of relief that we haven't gone down that road. But as I said, unfortunately for China, the tariff on goods imported into the US from China is now at 125%. So we will see how that all plays out over the coming hours, days and weeks ahead. Now, Ireland has been represented over in Washington, D.C. this week. Taoiseach Simon Harris, of course, who's also Minister for Trade as well. He had a very timely visit to Washington, D.C., where he met with the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick. And he said he also had very useful meetings on Capitol Hill. And he said that calm, measured, detailed discussions and negotiations to find a way forward here is key. And he said that was his message in the U.S. And he said it's also been their consistent message from the Irish government's point of view. And of course, the Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Martin Hayden, is continuing on his trade trade mission to the US this week. The minister spent the first 2 days of his trade mission in Washington, where he met with senior political representatives, including members of Congress and the Senate. And it also included a frank discussion with the US Secretary for Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, and during which the minister highlighted the mutually beneficial nature of US-Irish trade. Now, as we've mentioned on the podcast before, there are actually 770 Irish companies employing 200,000 American people in the US, particularly in the agri-food sector. And Minister Hayden did note that, look, this interaction with Brooke Rollins was also a warm meeting because of her family ancestry, which can be traced back to County Galway. And we did see in some photographs the minister presented Secretary Rollins with GAA jerseys to mark that connection, as Irish politicians sometimes are prone to do. And he's also invited Secretary Rollins to visit Ireland, and she has indicated that she hopes to take up this invitation in the autumn. Now, the minister, as part of this wider trade mission as well, he's also going to travel on to Kentucky and to Chicago to meet with Irish and American companies as well. And I suppose to keep pressing the message from the Irish government and from Ireland in general about the benefits, the mutual benefits of US-Irish trade relations. And look, it's good to see the pause button being pressed, Charles, but as you rightly said in the introduction, who knows where this goes next? But that is the current update as it stands when we're recording.
Yeah, it'll be vital to see what happens in the next 90 days, Aisling. But staying on matters of agribusiness, this week saw two major dairy processors and co-ops announce their financial results for 2024, with both businesses reporting strong performances. So, Aisling, let's start with Dairygold.
Yes, Charles. So on Wednesday, both Dairygold and Lakeland Dairies announced their financial results for 2024. And we will begin, as you said, with Dairygold, which reported a turnover of €1.4 billion for 2024. That's up 10.6 million on the previous year. And the Munster-based co-op said the performance reflected increased dairy market returns, which then were partially offset by a decrease in milk production and lower feed and fertilizer prices. EBITDA, or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation and amortization, stood at €65.4 million last year. That's up 10.4 million, or nearly 19% on the 2023 figure. Now, interesting to note that Dairygold's dairy processing wing, Dairy Ireland's turnover last year was €824 million, which is 58% of total turnover. And that division actually increased its turnover by €31 million in the year. Now, the co-op's year-end net bank debt stood at just over €157 million, which is up almost €13 million, or 9% on 2023. And this followed investments in capital expenditure of almost €49 million and making the final payment of €13 million for its 59% share of Vita Actives as well. Now, Dairygold said that the overall net bank debt levels remain at a very manageable level. Now, according to Dairygold, a drop in birth rates in China led to a reduction in demand for infant formula products, and Dairygold's demineralized whey, which is a key ingredient in this sector, faced market oversupply issues due to that reduced demand, which in turn impacted milk price. Now, the Dairygold quoted milk price for 2024 stood at 44.9 cents a litre, which included bonuses, sustainability payment and VAT, and that was an increase of 6.5 cents a litre paid out in 2023. Now, last year, Dairygold collected and processed 1.38 billion litres of milk from suppliers, which is actually down 2.1% year on year. And Dairygold Chief Executive Michael Hart told Agriland that the co-op is currently expecting a significant increase in milk volumes this year.
And look, 2024 had its challenges, challenging environment, especially the first half of the year. Weather was really against us. And, which impacted overall milk production and also, impacted grass growth and also the establishment of crops as well. So, the first half of the year was a real challenge from that perspective. From a member perspective, it impacted yields per cow.
Now, Michael Hart, the Dairygold chief executive, who you just heard there, also said that 2024 brought an end to key investments by Dairygold in terms of processing infrastructure. Its new casein plant, which was fully commissioned earlier this year and replaced a 40-year-old facility, marked the last big investment at a cost of €46 million. Now, in March of this year, we previously reported here on the podcast that the board of Dairygold approved this implementation of a business optimization program, which aims to achieve €14 million in cost savings over a 3-year period between now and 2027. And Michael Hart confirmed that 70 positions across the milk processing and retail divisions would be cut over that period. Now, they also pointed in their results to the nitrates derogation, and they said that it remains its top priority, securing its retention, and it continues to advocate for that at the highest levels, both here at home and abroad. And just before we leave it, I suppose Dairygold's milk supplier census, we learned some more about that census, which was carried out last year. And it showed that around 300 of the co-op's current suppliers, there's around 2,500 suppliers for Dairygold, about 300 of those plan to retire by 2030. And the co-op is planning to appoint a succession manager who will speak with farmers who are retiring about how to keep land in the dairy sector. And look, I suppose over recent months as well, we have seen a lot of movement in the wider dairy sector here at home and overseas in terms of mergers between various processors and co-ops. And even this week we saw Arla Foods, which is based in Denmark, and the German-based DMK Group announce a proposed merger which would create potentially the strongest dairy cooperative in Europe. And when we asked Michael Hart about this, he said that Dairygold is not currently involved in any discussions from a partnership or merger point of view. But he did say that Dairygold's position has always been that they're open to any partnership or collaboration or merger, looking at any opportunities that would be of benefit to their members. So very much leaving the door open there, Charles, but no current discussions ongoing in terms of any mergers from a Dairygold point of view.
And moving on then to Lakeland, Aisling, how did its figures shape up for 2024?
Yeah, also a positive financial picture painted by Lakeland Dairies. A net profit before tax for last year of over €21 million. That's after the almost €10 million loss which was incurred in 2023. Now, the processor said that 2024 was a critical year, seeing increased financial results after an unprecedented collapse in global dairy markets in 2023. Now, group revenue increased to €1.75 billion, up from 1.6 billion due to an increase in value-add sales as well as an increase in general dairy market pricing, particularly for butter in the second half of last year. Now, EBITDA for 2024 for Lakeland Dairies stood at 73.3 million compared to 43.4 million in 2023, and the group reported an operating profit of 42.2 million compared to 14.8 million in the previous year. So a significant jump there as well. Now, we saw that revenues in the food ingredients and agribusiness divisions were recorded at 1.1 billion and 113 million euro respectively, and the business's food service and consumer foods division saw revenues of 531 million, which was unchanged compared to last year. Now, Lakeland processed around 2 billion litres of milk in 2024, collected from roughly 3,200 suppliers in 17 counties on both sides of the border. And Lakeland said it paid a total of 998 million euro in milk price to its suppliers last year. And the processor embarked on a full-scale representation campaign, it said as well, with ministers and politicians on issues including the nitrates derogation, inheritance tax, bovine TB, and generational renewal as well. Now, Colin Kelly, the Lakeland Group chief executive, said that 2024 was one of the most strategically important years in the 130-year history of Lakeland Dairies. And when it came to the issue of US tariffs, he appealed for calm on both sides of the Atlantic. Take a listen.
Anything that would escalate the challenge that's there between the US and Europe, and the challenge that's there between the US and the rest of the world. I think, to be fair, the EU has been built on cool heads since 1973, and I don't expect we'll see anything different. And I think you can see in terms of delay with the response, there is plenty of dialogue, and I think we will see a measured response from the EU, which is very, very important.
And just before we leave Lakeland, Charles, the board of the co-op has today decided on a price for milk supplied during the month of March, the first announcement that we've got. And the price is remaining unchanged, a base price of 48.75 cents a litre in the Republic, and in the North there's a base price of 39.8 pence per litre. More details on that and on those financial results for both Lakeland Dairies and Dairygold on our website and app.
We're going to stay with dairy now, and a new survey seems to indicate that spring milk volumes have increased significantly in the last 2 weeks as a result of the higher temperatures that we've been having. Can you tell us more about this, Aisling?
Yeah, so this is the latest calving insight survey from FRS Co-op, and it's highlighted that some dairy farmers out there have had to grapple with weak grass growth for most of the months of March, despite dry weather and pretty much excellent grazing conditions out on farm. And the weak grass growth levels for most of last month forced a lot of farmers out there to increase concentrate levels and feed silage by night to bolster early milk volumes. But the survey said now that warmer weather over the past 10 days has provided that much needed boost for grass growth, and production levels on dairy farms are beginning to take off. And certain farm operators with FRS Co-op have reported that in certain parts of the country, milk production volumes are up by as much as 10% compared to last year. And spring calving was reported as 89% complete on average across the country by the first week of April. In Leinster, calving progress stood at 85% on average. Calving was over 90% complete in Munster, while in the West and border counties, spring calving progress averaged at almost 90% on client farms. And on the wider dairy markets this week, Charles, Ornua confirmed a decrease in its March Purchase Price Index, or PPI, at 159.6, down from the previous month's figure of 161.9. Now, after deducting the estimated processing costs of 9.5 cents a litre, the PPI figure implies an indicative return of 47.4 cents per litre, VAT inclusive, for milk at 3.6% fat and 3.3% protein, which is net of Ornua costs to market.
Now, the Department of Agriculture has published a map outlining the maximum nitrates derogation stocking rate limits for 2025. The map details the areas where the maximum stocking rate of 220 kilograms of manure nitrogen per hectare applies. Aisling, there's always interest on this and other issues related to the nitrates derogation. So what do we know and what's been said?
Yeah, so the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, not happy about this, Charles. They've hit out at how the Department of Agriculture has communicated the stocking rate limits to farmers. Obviously, as you said, the nitrates derogation, hugely important to many farmers out there across the country. And the Deputy President of the ICMSA, Eamon Carroll, said that the map shows a significant increase in the 220 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare areas, meaning that many more farmers will now have a maximum stocking density of 220 kilograms rather than 250 kilograms. Now, you can see the map on our website and app, and you will see there are swathes of the country where there is a different colour applied on this map. But we're looking for more information from the department on this and an official statement about how this is going to be applied. But Eamon Carroll, the Deputy President of the ICMSA, said he was hugely disappointed that the department had not notified farmers affected on an individual basis, despite the fact that it will directly impact them this year. Now, he said the ICMSA had called for this individual communication to affected farmers at the last Agriculture Water Quality Group meeting, and he said it was disappointing, to put it mildly, that this had not happened. And he said to imagine that just publishing the new map on the department's website with the affected areas is sufficient communication is very casual and an inconceivable way to communicate on an issue of such importance to so many farmers. And he said, as a matter of fact, this should have been communicated with the Agricultural Water Group too, and there needs to be further engagement with the group on a myriad of issues, of which this is one. So ICMSA not happy about how this has been put out there, Charles. As I said, you can see this map on our website and app, and we have contacted the department for further information, and as soon as we get that, we will give it to you.
Just before we move on, I'll just update you on another key piece of information for farmers on the ground. The CAP Strategic Plan Dairy Beef Welfare Scheme has opened for new applicants, which offers €20 per eligible calf up to a maximum of 50 calves for eligible entrants. The closing date for applications is May 15th, which is also the closing date for applications for the Basic Income Support for Sustainability, or BIS. And as Aisling reported this week, applications for BIS are progressing, with some 36,700 applications made as of the end of last week. But for our next item, we'll move on to forestry. And the impact of storm damage to forests and plantations was for many weeks a frequent topic that appeared on the podcast. And now it's in the news again, courtesy of concerns raised by forestry contractors, Aisling.
Yeah, so as you said, we have discussed it at length here on the podcast. Storm Éowyn caused serious damage to nearly 24,000 hectares of forestry plantations across the country, and efforts are continuing on the ground to salvage those trees which were blown down before they rot, and to ensure that the plantation owners get as much as they possibly can for those trees. Now, the Department of Agriculture this week issued a trader notice, as it called it, to forestry operators, highlighting the biosecurity risk of imported forestry machinery. Now, the notice said that the importation into the country of second-hand or used forestry machinery could pose a biosecurity risk due to soil, organic matter, and or plant debris which may be attached to the machine. And it said that the soil, organic matter or plant debris which could be attached to the machines can contain harmful forestry pests and pathogens. Now, in order to ensure that there is no biosecurity risk associated with imports of this type of machinery and to avoid the control measures being imposed, the department has advised importers of these machines to ensure that measures are taken to make sure the machines are cleaned as new before being used. And in addition to all of this, forestry operators are required to provide the department with pre-notification of the arrival of used or second-hand machinery being imported. Now, the Irish Farmers Association called for strict control measures at Irish ports on these imported second-hand or used forestry machines. And Padraig Stapleton, the association's farm forestry chair, called on the department to ensure that all such machinery entering this country goes through these measures. And he said the threat of soil, organic matter or plant debris which could be attached to these machines could potentially contain harmful pests such as the great bark beetle, which we've spoken about here on the podcast before. And he called for any machinery entering the country without meeting strict biosecurity requirements to be refused entry. And you mentioned the contractors, the Association of Farm and Forestry Contractors, the FCI, also called this week for an outright ban on the introduction of foreign-owned forest machines, while Irish machines are lying idle. And the FCI again highlighted, like the IFA, the potential threats associated with the importation of these machines, which have recently worked in European forests, which can contain the bark beetle and other kinds of pests. And Anne Gleeson-Hanrahan, she's the FCI Managing Director, said if there is a requirement to get support from forestry contractors from across Europe, it's vital that a machine import licensing and inspection process be put in place for these types of machines. Now, sticking with forestry, Charles, and the Forest Windblow Task Force, which met again this week, is to develop a detailed action plan on the next steps to deal with forestry downed by Storm Éowyn. A workshop is also being planned to take place in May to inform the development of this action plan, according to the department. And the plan is going to involve input from experts who work with the European Forest Risk Facility. And some of those actually addressed this week's meeting of the task force. Now, the Forest Risk Facility is designed to help European countries to reach a common understanding on approaches for tackling the most pressing forestry risks, which include wind, fire, and disease. And elsewhere in forestry news, ESB Networks has proposed a number of new measures to enhance the resilience of the electricity grid for legal consideration, including the creation of forestry corridors to protect overhead lines. If granted, that proposed legislation would equip the electricity provider with even greater entitlements to land access and usage. The ICMSA have questioned the rationale of this proposal, which they said has caused high alert amongst the farming community. And the president of the ICMSA, Dennis Drennan, said he was disappointed by the government's lack of consultation on the matter with farmers. And the ESB has already identified 710 kilometres of forestry corridors in its analysis of customers most affected by forestry windfall in the recent storms. And that analysis is continuing, and it should be completed by the end of this month. And the ESB said there is a requirement that the corridors deemed most at risk of further windfall be cleared cleared out before next winter, which will demand new laws to be enacted in its favour. So we'll see how that all pans out.
Just before we move on, there is just time to bring you an update from today on the acceleration of wear and tear allowances for farm safety equipment. The scheme provides accelerated capital allowances for a broader range of farm safety equipment, and farmers are being urged to consider it. You can check out all the key details on Agriland.ie and the Agriland app. But moving on now, and when the good weather hits, it is all too often accompanied by wildfires of various types, be it gorse or other types of vegetation. And Aisling, unfortunately, this current spell of fine weather is no different.
Yes, Charles. So the Department of Agriculture has actually extended its condition orange danger rating for fire risk. That indicates a high risk of fire until next Monday. And it's due to the current weather patterns, which I suppose pose this higher fire risk with these current easterly high pressure dominated weather system that we're having across the country, which is great in some ways, but it's definitely kept fire services right across the island very busy over the last week. And IFA Farm Forestry Chair Padraig Stapleton has called on landowners to be vigilant during this danger notice. Now, unfortunately, we have reported over the past week on a range of different fires across the country. Last Friday, there was a fire on a pristine bog in County Westmeath, and by the time the fire was extinguished, some 100 acres of bog located in the Finna area in the north of the county had been burned. Now, several sites around the Wild Neffin National Park in County Mayo were also affected by major fire incidents last weekend. And one of the fires completely destroyed a boardwalk which had been put in place. And there was also a forest fire in the area as well. And the department said that the fire was started on Friday night and it was either set deliberately or by recklessness. And the Minister of State for Heritage, Nature and Biodiversity, Christopher O'Sullivan, said he believed that the fires in County Mayo were a devastating reminder of how fragile our natural world is. And he said that the destruction not only scars the landscape, it destroys habitats and species, but it also deprives communities of cherished spaces for education, recreation and connection with nature. And in my own home county of Kerry, Charles, the Kerry Fire Service has been very busy this week dealing with numerous fires, including one in the south of the county, which at one stage actually threatened 2 houses and a school before it was brought under control by firefighters. And we also heard from conservation rangers in Killarney National Park this week issuing a stern message to the public after a devastating fire in a woodland area of the park, which is a yew woodland, which is very, very important in terms of its ecological status. And staff from the National Parks and Wildlife Service and Kerry Fire Service attended the fire and managed to put it out quickly. But we were told that the fire was actually started by a disposable barbecue. And I suppose another reminder to the public not to be lighting fires or barbecues, particularly at this time when we have this very high risk of fires at the moment. And you can see the damage that was done to the area of woodland. Thankfully, it was brought under control before any further damage was done. And in Northern Ireland, a major incident was actually declared on the Mourne Mountains last weekend, given the scale of the fires there. And the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service was actually called out to 146 gorse fires in just a 3-day period between Thursday of last week and last Sunday. And in one instance, people were evacuated from their homes due to the dangers posed by these fires. And the Minister for Agriculture in Northern Ireland, Andrew Murr, said the latest spate of wildfires are having a devastating impact on the environment and wildlife. And he said that fires are putting lives at risk while also endangering homes and farms. And he said that grossly irresponsible actions by a few are having serious destructive impacts and must stop before a tragedy occurs and people are killed. So clearly, look, on both sides of the border, Charles, this is an enormous drain on the resources of the fire service, because of course they have to go out and attend other emergencies, whether that might be road traffic accidents, house fires, all of the multitude of services that firefighters provide to the community on a daily basis. So, I mean, if people can prevent these fires starting in the first place, I think that has to be the starting point. And, you know, whether fires are lit deliberately, unfortunately, or in the case of barbecues being brought out into national parks, as we've seen down here in Kerry, it's just, I think people need to really have a hard look at the conditions at the moment and to make sure that further lives aren't put in danger and environmental destruction is avoided.
Yeah, that's a hugely important message to put out there, Aisling. But unfortunately, that brings us to the end of today's podcast. Please don't forget to rate, review, and follow the Farming Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love if you could spare some time to give us 5 stars and share the Farming Week with anyone you think might be interested. From Aisling and myself, enjoy the weekend.